Hi everyone, I'm Pam Laricchia from livingjoyfully.ca, and today I'm here with Jen Kobrick. Hi Jen.
Hi Pam.
Hi. So Jen connected with me recently and suggested this topic, and she passionately shared some really great thoughts around the value of the unschooling mindset when it comes to parenting younger children. And so I'm so excited that she agreed to chat with me today, and we managed to arrange it. So to get us started, Jen, can you share with us a bit about you and your family?
Sure. So there's me, obviously, and I am a massage therapist by trade, although I don't do very much of that right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested in travel and a lot of creative pursuits like knitting and cooking and things like that. And my husband, Ryan, is a professor of spaceflight operations and an all-around space geek. and my son, Rafi, will be 3 in July. So he is not technically unschooling age yet. But he loves cars and all sorts of vehicles. And he loves Legos, and he loves plants in the garden, and he loves animals. And he is a very strong-willed and persistent and opinionated little soul, which I'm grateful for every day because it has pushed me as a parent much more than a more laid-back kid would have done.
Oh, I love that because that was, I can just go right back there, right? Because that was my experience as well. And to be able to make that shift and, you know, just thinking like long before I heard of unschooling, or, you know, because my kids originally went to school, but from that young age, they just had so much spirit, so much opinion, and it didn't seem wrong. So it is a fun yet busy stage, right?
Yes.
So how did you actually come across unschooling?
So we had been considering homeschooling in some fashion since long before my son was conceived. And I knew homeschooling existed at least since I was in high school, if not younger.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when my son was really tiny, like 3 or 4 months old, actually, we went to this place called Lab School where we used to live. And it was like part school for kids. It only went through pre-K, birth through pre-K, basically. But really their focus was parent education. And it was very focused on a peaceful parenting, conscious discipline mindset. And so that was really my introduction into non-traditional parenting practices. But at the same time, the child part of it was just kind of ridiculous because, you know, I mean, it looked more like a traditional pre-K for the little bit older kids, you know, but my son's class was kids under a year.
Mm-hmm.
And they would they would set up some cool activities, you know, like things that were messy or required expensive climbing equipment or whatever that would be hard to do at home.
Yeah.
But it was like there was this set block of time for art and a set block of time for stories and a set block of time for sensory play and then a set snack time and all of these things with these very, very, very young children. And my son often did not want to go along with that agenda. He, you know, would get into one of the activities and then be really pissed about having to leave it and
having to move.
And you know, and so I found that Lab School very valuable for myself, for my own learning and growth. And then we moved when my son was about 1, and we were going to be too far away to keep going there. And so in my exploration of like, how could I continue this experience that had been valuable for me? I mean, I found some wonderful parenting resources and that's great. But when I was looking at how to replace the child part of it, I started seeing all these, you know, I mean, homeschool curriculum exists for toddlers, which is ridiculous, but they do. And as I'm looking at them, I'm like, there's no way he's going to do that. I'm going to be fighting with him to get him to do that. There's just no way that he's going to go along with some agenda about sitting down and doing shape flashcards or something. And so somewhere along the way, as I was going, okay, well, so we're not going to do that kind of school. So maybe we'll look at like a Waldorf or Montessori approach. And somewhere, and then, okay, there are things I like about that and things I don't like, and I'm still going to have to coerce them to do things. So maybe I need to make my own curriculum. And then I'm going, well, that sounds like a lot of work. So somewhere along the lines, I'm like, okay, there's got to be another way. There's got to be another way. And somewhere along there, I came across some sort of unschooling resource. I do not remember which was the first one I came across. But when I did, I went, oh, well, that's not a lot of work. I mean, I guess it is in one sense, but not in like preparation work.
Yeah.
And not in like fighting with the kid to make them do it work. Mm-hmm. It's work that doesn't feel like work, and it's work that feels like play and fun. So since then, so I guess my son was about 1 or just over 1 when I discovered the concept of unschooling. And so since then, I've just been reading and listening to your podcast and, trying to take to heart the idea of applying a little bit and seeing what happens, and then applying a little bit more and seeing what happens.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. And that's one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you when you suggested it, because I know in the past I've talked about how attachment parenting can transition pretty seamlessly into unschooling as children hit school age, right? But, I didn't discover attachment parenting when my kids were younger. That's been more based on my reading of attachment theory than my own experience. I mean, like you, I was kind of feeling it out and going that direction because I was following my child, but that was just because that's what made sense to me, right, at the time. But you're engaged in attachment parenting circles right now, so I am excited to hear your experience. So have you found the attachment parenting and unschooling mindsets diverging as your son is entering like toddlerhood, I guess? He's 2, did you say now?
Yes, he's 2 in about 9 months. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't want to paint all attachment parents with the same brush by any means, because I think that actually, in theory, I think a lot of attachment parenting ideas go more seamlessly with unschooling.
Exactly.
But I think a lot of people who come to attachment parenting, or who have a lot of those ideas when their children are infants, still have a lot of the traditional sort of parenting goals. They still want to accomplish X, Y, and Z with their child. They still want their child to have a predictable bedtime, and they want their child to eat at certain times, or they want their child to cooperatively get dressed in the morning, or whatever thing they want to happen easily parenting. But they want to accomplish it without force, and certainly without violence, and without screaming. And so they are looking for gentle control rather than making this huge paradigm shift of trying to let go of the control altogether. And so that's where, as I have learned more about unschooling, where I've started to become frustrated with some of the advice that I get in those circles, because I'll struggle with something that's unique to a toddler, that somebody with an 8 or 9-year-old is going to be like, yeah, in 5 years, you won't even remember that, which is helpful and not helpful at the same time. Yeah. But the attachment parenting advice will be, okay, well, natural consequences or rewards or things like that, that aren't quite what I'm looking for. So I think it can be very useful, certainly in shifting a mindset away from punitive control of children, but it doesn't maybe go quite as far away from control as unschooling mindset does.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's a great point, how toddlerhood is when it becomes more pronounced, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, as infants are fairly easy for the most part. I mean, of course, there are infants who are really challenging, but, most of infants' needs are meetable if you can figure out what they are. Infants want to be held, they want to be fed, they want their diaper changed. they don't, they don't have a lot of wants that either can't be met or, or a lot of frustrations that need to be expressed, but not necessarily fixed, and then as they become toddlers, they start to have a lot more emotions that they need to express and that need to be supported, but not necessarily fixed or handled or dealt with by the parent, which is really hard, I think, for a lot of parents who didn't grow up with it, and with it being normal to express emotions and have those emotions listened to by somebody, And toddlers also start to develop a lot of agency and have a lot of their own opinions about how things should go and how they want their body to be treated, and they can communicate those opinions more. So where an infant might have had opinions but you didn't know it, a toddler is going to make real sure that you know what they think.
Yeah, and I mean, just physically, they're now able to get around, right? Like, that whole point of agency. Now they can actually accomplish it, right?
Yes.
Oh, that's fascinating, and it makes so much sense. So I thought it would be fun to dive into a few examples with you. I was hoping you'd share some ideas for parents who are looking to work together with their young children, rather than that gently controlling them to do or not do the thing that they want or don't want in that moment. So I thought maybe we'd start with bedtimes.
So my son has never been a child who has slept super predictably, even when he was an infant. And there has been a lot of pressure from some sources, and there's a sort of a societal idea that it's a good and important thing for really young children to sleep on a predictable schedule. And in particular, that really young children need a really early bedtime. And my son is a night owl. Which when he was really little wasn't as obvious, because like a kid, a 6-month-old who stays up till 8 p.m. is not really it's not impacting the adult schedule.
Yeah.
But now that he's not sleeping as much of the day, it's more clear that he is definitely a night owl. And my husband and I are too. So it's not like that should be a surprise to anybody. But it is sometimes a challenge, because we'll get comments from complete strangers out in public, like, shouldn't you already be in bed, or somebody's up late, or things like that which fortunately at this point we're fairly confident in that he's doing just fine with his own sleep. But we have had to get creative to make sure that everybody is getting enough sleep, and especially when my husband has to get up at a certain time for work. And so he needs to make sure that he's getting enough sleep. And so there are some nights where I have to try to find ways to keep my son relatively quiet, at the other end of the house, so that my husband can go to bed if he's got to get up early. And there are lots of times where I will sleep in until my son wakes up, because that's how I get enough sleep. And we've had to get creative about taking advantage of, if he goes to bed a bit earlier or if he takes a nap, about making sure that we take that time to be together and don't go, well, I was planning on doing this tonight and we were planning on hanging out tomorrow night, and just taking those opportunities when they
come
exist.
Yeah.
And learning to be very flexible, it's also been helpful, as we've started looking at it from an unschooling perspective, to look at really observing him and his cycle, because without trying to force him to go to sleep at a certain time, we've started to notice the behaviors that show that he's starting to get sleepy, not enough to go pass out now, but okay, so he's doing these things that are his kind of cues that he's starting to get a little tired. So that's when we start turning the lights down, and that's when we start suggesting reading a story or something that's calm and quiet, and then there's another set of sort of cues that he has when he's really getting close to falling asleep. And so that's when I can suggest, hey, let's go in the chair together, and he'll usually go, yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, looking at it from a perspective of sort of guiding him to help him follow his own rhythms, that he may not be ready to follow totally on his own, rather than trying to force him to follow a clock to go to sleep.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I love the idea of rhythm. And often, like on the podcast, we talk about flow too, right? And it's learning, you're learning so much about him to help him follow his flow. You know what I mean? Like, I love the way you talked about seeing his cues, because that's a way you're helping him explore his cues, right? Yeah, right now you are, kind of identifying them and using them to point in a direction to support him, right? In the way that you think he's trying to express, right? And that's how that whole feedback loop, right, of doing that with you is learning for him about learning about himself. It becomes, if it works for them, they start to eventually notice those cues and like, oh, so that's when we do this, and then that's when we do that, right? It's right. Such a great way to learn about yourself rather than, like you said, some kids do want to go till they drop, but so often, having a routine around the things that we do regularly, especially around bedtime, is something that's very comforting. So I love the way you talked about bringing that all together, because so often when people hear, it's a classic unschooling new person, you don't have bedtimes. Oh, well then, okay, we'll take away bedtimes. Then we're not supposed to have bedtimes. And then, everybody just runs around until they're screaming, upset, and crash, right?
Yeah.
So there's a totally different way to go about it.
And it's funny because, toddlers haven't yet learned how to censor themselves. And so the experimentation with that is so clear cut, like he'll say in exactly so many words, Mom, I'm really tired, but I don't want to stop playing.
Yeah.
And you can see him experiment with staying up later than he really should, and feeling super tired and cranky, and then being super tired and cranky the next day if he doesn't sleep in long enough or whatever. And, you can almost see the gears turning in their head as they start to make those connections of oh yeah, I didn't want to stop playing last night, so now I don't have the energy to play at all today.
Yeah.
I
know children are capable of learning right from the get-go, aren't they? Really just amazing to watch. Okay, so the next one we were going to talk about was sharing. So now that we're, moving away from control and more into connection, working with our kids, how do you approach that?
So sharing is one that I think is loaded for a lot of people with a lot of fear and anxiety for the future, with a lot of oh, if my 2-year-old isn't sharing, then they're going to be, nobody's ever going to be friends with them.
Yeah.
They're never going to be able to have good relationships with people. They're never going to share. Yeah. They're never going to care about anybody but themselves.
They're going to be that lone teenager
right.
with nobody.
Right. And so then they're coming into 2-year-olds who want the same toy with all of that piled on top of it.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I found very helpful, is to step back from that and just be in what's happening right now in this moment. And also that when you can kind of it's almost like things slow down when you let go of some of that baggage and urgency and intensity about it. But things slow down enough to where I can, in the same span of time that someone else might be yelling at their kid to share, that I can see, oh, in this situation right now, it's that they both want this toy and there's only one of it. Or in this situation right now, it's that one of them is tired or hungry and is just feeling, or is overwhelmed by the number of kids around and is just feeling frustrated. or maybe this really is a very special toy to one of the kids, and they're probably not ever going to want to share it, or at least not in this play date or but but all of those sort of have a different response, and I've also found that it can be very helpful when, as a parent, there's the internal programming saying, I need to do something, and then there's the external, like, all these people are watching me to see what I'm going to do with my kid who's not sharing. And that it can be helpful to sort of feel like you're doing something, but without grabbing the toy away or yelling at the child to share, to reflect, to say, oh, you both really want that truck. Or, it sounds like you have different ideas about how to play with that toy, or whatever. Yeah. But describing what's going on to them. Or if one kid has already grabbed a toy away from the other, like, oh, it looks like he's really sad to not have that toy anymore. And that sometimes one or both kids respond to that reflecting by sharing, or by offering some other kind of solution, suggesting a toy the other child can go play with instead, or something. It's amazing how even at 2 or 3 they can start offering their own solutions to these problems. And sometimes I just end up comforting one child while they're upset, and still verbalizing that for them to the other child, that it looks like this child is really upset not to have the toy. It looks like they really, really wanted to play with that. But yeah, I would say, my son's very introverted, and so and he gets easily overwhelmed by a lot of kids being around. And so one of the ways that shows up is by, he doesn't want to play with them because he doesn't want to interact socially.
Yeah. So
if he's feeling like he doesn't want to play with the kids, it usually shows up as not wanting to let the kids play with the toys he's interested in. Right.
Yeah.
But it's more and more often now that when that comes up, that he suggests what toy they should go play with, or or that he even says, I don't want to play with you right now, which probably sounds inappropriate to some parents too, but is very honest and very forthcoming. And so it's and also I think it's helpful, maybe helpful for people to realize that it's not normal for 2 and 3-year-olds to share the way people think 2 and 3-year-olds should be shared. It's normal for 2 and 3-year-olds to have very clear ideas about what they want to be doing with their toys, and not want anybody else to be interfering with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And what you're describing in just in their language, explaining what's going on in the moment, that's how they learn, right? That's how they're gaining experience with those moments. And like you said, now your son is to the point where he's starting to offer some solutions along the way, right? When these things come up. So, that's the whole point, right? Instead of the rule,
right,
says you have to share, and jumping in, letting them learn through those experiences, those moments when it happens, not setting it up, and not, the whole natural consequence thing. Oh, if you don't share, then I'm going to take it away, because then you play with it, right? Maybe that's
right. Because when we project this out into the future, right, when he's 15 or 20 or 40, it's not that we want our kids to give away whatever they have just because somebody else wants it, right?
Yeah.
None of us do that as an adult. Even if we're very generous and gregarious, we don't give away everything we have just because somebody else wants it, right?
And we don't ask other people for things.
Right,
out of the blue, right? I like that car. I want that really car.
Special to them, right? But we do hope that when they're grown up, that they will, that they will see somebody else feeling sad or left out or hurt, and that they'll want to help. Not necessarily by giving them something, but that they'll want to find a way to help that person feel better.
It's about the people, not the thing, right? It's about the kids that are involved, the people, whatever age
Right.
that are involved in that moment, not really about the thing that they're fighting over, right, or, both interested, right, in, etc. Like, yes, at any point, it's about the, right, connection and the people involved.
And it's almost never really about the toy they're fighting over anyway.
Yeah.
It's really about how they're learning how to play with each other, or it's about something totally unrelated, like being tired or hungry or
exactly,
whatever, but it's not really about the car or the train or whatever the specific item is. It's never really about that.
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
Which is why buying 2 of them doesn't solve problems.
I love that. I remember there was oh my gosh, it was a book I had as a child, and it was like these 2 princes. And, it was a book about sharing and how they each wanted the same things. So their parents bought them 2 of everything, and it didn't solve everything.
No, of course not.
I love that. Okay, so let's dive into another big one that I know a lot of people ask about: teeth brushing. Toothbrushes for brushing your teeth.
Yeah. So I know lots of other unschoolers have talked about the actual science about teeth and about tooth decay, and so I don't think we need to rehash all of that. But specifically with really little kids, I have met very few really little kids who like brushing their teeth. So this seems to be something that basically everyone deals with, and it's another great opportunity for creativity and for observing what it is that the child doesn't like. Is it that the child doesn't like something being stuck in their mouth? Is it that they don't like something being done to them without their involvement? Is it they don't like the taste or the texture, or that they're already so tired by the time it's happening before bed that they can't cooperate with anything? What specifically is going on with that child? And so we have played various games at various points. We found some wipes that have xylitol in them, which we originally got for, like, if we're out, we keep some in the diaper bag. So if we're out and he looks like he might fall asleep on the way home, we use them. But sometimes he'll request that instead of a toothbrush when we're at home. And that's always an option to him. We've looked at like other types of brushes, like they make these like wide flat brushes that are meant for like the gums of infants.
Oh yeah.
But there's no reason you can't put, toddler toothpaste on them and let the kid chew on it. I mean, it's basically a little silicone teething toy almost.
Yeah.
And currently I'd say about half the time we play a game and about half the time he's not interested. But he's perfectly happy to have us brush his teeth in his sleep, and he sleeps hard enough that, that when he first falls asleep, we can just slide the toothbrush in and brush his teeth and he'll sleep through it, which not all kids might sleep through that. And we've told him that that's what we're going to do. And he's like, yeah, fine, brush my teeth after I go to sleep.
Yeah.
But yeah, just that there's so many more options than you stand there while I brush your teeth right now or else.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's totally the creativity and working with them. Like, even if I love that, we're gonna do that when you fall asleep. Sure, good. I mean, it's so true. There's so many options, and like you said, if they're getting too tired, maybe right before bed isn't the time. Maybe you have a different kind of routine. There's just so much to it, and it's that creatively, I think you can work to find things so that you very rarely, if ever, end up in an or else situation, because then it's all about the power. Again, it's not about the teeth at that point, right?
Right. And I think, obviously healthy teeth are important, but But nobody's teeth are going to rot in 2 days or 3 days or 4 days or a month of not brushing their teeth, so it's not something that necessarily has to be solved today. If you try
Plus,
something today and it doesn't
yeah,
work, try
try
something else.
something
And if
else.
that doesn't work, try something else. And in the time that it takes you to come up with 30 different options and try them all, something is going to click, or else your kid's going to change and grow and something's going to be different.
Something else bothers them now, or it no longer bothers them. But I mean, there's also the genetic component too, right? You could be diligently brushing every day and they've got soft teeth and they get cavities. We are it's working through that shame piece too, right? That feeling of judgment if my child has cavities or whatever. And we are just so conditioned to blame ourselves for so much of everything, right? To do with our children. Whereas, just working with them and being creative and living with them, that gets us where we can go, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And this is also a great opportunity for modeling,
Yeah.
I mean, brushing your own teeth in front of your kids.
Doing it together,
or with your kids, and talking about why you brush your teeth, and not just because I don't want my teeth to rot, but, like my teeth feel funky when I wake up in the morning, so I like to brush them first thing when I get out of bed, and then my teeth feel better and my food tastes better when I eat breakfast, and I don't brush my teeth in the morning really because of, wanting my teeth to be healthy. I brush my teeth in the morning because I don't want my mouth to taste funky.
Yeah.
And that, but sharing those things, sharing those kinds of the realities of why we make the decisions that we make about our own health and our own bodies.
Yeah. No, just living actively alongside them, not hiding all those little pieces, If we notice that we usually brush our teeth after they go to bed or whatever, we can change up our routine too. And it's like, going to brush when they do, or maybe we do it together. We make the point in the morning. Maybe it's easiest when everybody's fresh, and, because as I've heard, as long as you've got, one brush in a day, that's fine. I know that's what my dentist told my kids. As long as you get to them at least once a day, you're good. So, and my kids are good at that. Like, dentist is one of my phobias from my childhood. So I don't like it, but I worked hard not to really transfer that to them. So, they're brushing their teeth. They're like, oh, I want to go see the dentist now. They're like, okay. I'll do it too.
Will you hold my hand while I take you to the
dentist? Exactly. Oh, that's funny. Okay. How about some tips that you might have with regards to young children and technology?
Yeah, so this has been one of the hardest things for me, because I grew up with a very restricted and controlled use of technology. And actually, as I was making notes for this, it occurred to me that I grew up with really restricted access to TV. But back then, when I was really little, most people didn't have a computer in their house, but we did because my dad worked with them. And so that made us like, oh, your kids have access to this amazing educational tool that the step ahead. And now, of course, computers are for a lot of people lumped in with TVs and tablets and phones as all rotting your brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it took me a while to get around to seeing how technology could be useful, and could be a learning tool, without explicitly doing educational content, but just which, I mean, lots and lots of unschoolers have talked about all of the wonderful things about technology, but specifically with young kids, I think there's a lot of pressure about this recommendation about no screens before age 2, and so there's I think a lot of fear, some of the same fear that all parents have, but really a lot of extra pile of judgment
Mhm.
piled on to parents of young kids, or fear of judgment, at least.
Yeah.
That if other people see your kid using a phone, or, or watching something on a tablet, they're going to assume that you're an unengaged parent who just sits their kid on the couch all day and doesn't ever interact with them.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely a huge piece for all parents, but I think maybe especially parents of really young children to work through. But also then to make sure that you're not just abandoning them on the couch with the device when they're interested in watching something, because especially young kids, like my son knows how to find a new video on YouTube now, or at least if it's in the like list of recommended videos attached to whatever he's watching. But of course he's not writing, so he can't like search for something on his own. So if he's not interested in any of the videos that are there on the screen, then he needs help to search for whatever he's looking for. But when he first started watching videos on YouTube, he didn't know how to change the video yet. And so it really required me to be very present while he was watching, and to be really watching him, so that if he found himself watching a video that looked interesting but then turned out to be violent, or or something that made him uncomfortable, that I was paying attention to be able to help him change it. And maybe other kids would immediately scream and yell if they found a video they weren't comfortable with, but my son sort of would draw inwards instead.
Yeah.
So he would get more quiet. So if I was on the other side of the house doing something, I wouldn't necessarily know that he was getting uncomfortable and needing help. And so it was really important that I was there next to him and engaged in watching. And also I think, one of the things that a lot of parents fear is that their kids are going to find something inappropriate watching videos if they're not controlled and restricted. And a lot of the things that parents are afraid their kid are going to find are things that are really unlikely that your 2-year-old is going to find. Your 2-year-old's not likely to find porn on YouTube. But that doesn't mean they're not going to find something they are uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important distinction, because like my son's really interested in cars and vehicles. And a lot of people think that little boys should be all about cars crashing into each other and, monster trucks crushing other cars and things like that. And some are, and that's fine, but mine is not. Mine views cars basically as people. And so he finds that as horrible to watch as you and I might find like a really gory scene, really gory murder scene in a movie or something. And so, so I think there's a place where somebody who's not paying really close attention might be like, oh, well, that's fine. He should be fine watching that, but he's not. And he needs help. He needs help to change it to something that he is comfortable with. So I think it's really important for really young kids who for parents of really young kids who may not know how to do all of the things with the device themselves, that the parent is staying really engaged and observing what's going on for the child.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great point, to be there with them. Because, I mean, in all the things that we've talked about, it's been about the connection with the parent, right? It's been about being engaged with your child. Like, that's this lifestyle, if you're choosing this lifestyle. And to be there with, I just love that, watching for his cues. Again, another connection that we've seen, whether it's cues, for tiredness, or cues for things bothering them and brushing their teeth, or things that they're looking for. And because at that young age, I know I've talked before about how at that young age, we're kind of their hands, right? Because there's things that they want to do that they aren't yet capable of doing for themselves, right? So when and sometimes they want to do it for themselves, right? Then no, I'll do it. And having the patience and letting them do it themselves is awesome. But other times they just want the thing done. I want to see the next video. Oh, I don't like that. I want to change it. So to be there and engaged with them so that we can do those things for them, so that, what they're engaged in stays connected with what they're thinking. Right. They're accomplishing what they're wanting to accomplish. And so they're gaining the experience that they're looking for in that moment. So
Right.
I love that point about being their hands and helping. Even, they might not even know why they're starting to feel uncomfortable, whether it's with a video or a game or something they're watching or whatever, right? But that's, again, us noticing the cues and saying,
Right.
hey, would you like to change that? Would you like to stop that? Would you want to go do something else? You're just helping them learn more about themselves in that moment, right? They're like, oh yeah, I am feeling icky.
Right.
They may not have made that connection between how they're feeling and what they're seeing or something like that, right? So yeah, staying engaged with them, that's a huge piece. I love that. And the other piece that you mentioned, the shame and the judgment that we can feel from other parents. I mean, that is something for us to work through, right? When we let's face it, unschooling is unconventional, isn't it? Right? So you're gonna need to start working on that.
Yeah.
As early as you can, and it's going to keep coming up, as they hit different ages. There's different expectations in society, etc. And us knowing our child, because for me that was a huge piece that helped me work through so much. Because I was engaged with my child, I knew my child. I knew what they were getting out of whatever it was they were choosing to do or not to do, why they didn't want to do this and why they did want to do that. So that always helped me get more comfortable and pass that judgment. Like, I can see why you're thinking that, because that's very, conventional. That's the way most people think, but that doesn't actually relate to my situation. That's how I could talk myself through it, when I was feeling something, right?
Right.
So yeah, I love that. That was great. Oh, look, our next question. Conventionally, there's a big push for early childhood education. I mean, you can get a degree in it, and then there's like whole industries around that. And I suspect that you have felt that push already. And I was curious about how you respond to that through the lens of unschooling.
Yeah, it's amazing how pervasive this idea is of educating children from from birth, but really especially from about 2 or so. And so in some ways, I actually think it might be easier for parents of really young children to start to make that shift with seeing learning happening. Because even mainstream parents don't think that you need to like teach a child to walk.
Yeah.
For instance, and so I think if the ideas come along in the right time, in the right way, that it doesn't need to be that big of a leap to go, oh, well, if I don't need to teach them how to walk, then I probably don't need to teach them how to, learn their numbers or something as well. These things will come up. And also the things that really young children are expected to learn are so prevalent in life. Colors and shapes and numbers and letters are everywhere, where like calculus might not be so obviously a part of everyday life. So I think in some ways it's a little bit easier to make that mental shift.
Yeah.
And then obviously, the more you lay that foundation, the younger you lay that foundation, the easier that is when they are school age. But it can be challenging to be around parents who have a more traditionally education mindset, and are already starting to quiz kids on on whether they know their numbers in the right order and things like that, and so it's been a process to start to see, sometimes it's obvious where something translates to academic learning. Like since he's really into cars, all the cars have numbers on them, and so he's like learned to read numbers just from being interested in cars and being obsessed with knowing which car is which by the number that's on it. But then there's other things that are not necessarily as obvious how they translate into academic learning. And so already we're having to start making that leap of faith and that trust in him that, that he's getting what he needs when he needs it, and that, that he will learn all of the things that he needs to know in his own way, in his own time, without necessarily looking like he's learning those things. I mean, like the numbers, I had no idea that he had really figured out numbers, because he could just be memorizing, that every time they talk about Cruz Ramirez, they say she's number 51, right? Like he could just be memorizing that. It didn't really occur to me that he had learned to read all of the numbers, not so much the 51, but the 5 and the 1.
But
until we're out walking down the street and he starts saying that house is 768. I'm going, what? Because it's, it's not obvious until after the fact.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, of course, that's where he got that. Or sometimes, where the heck did you get that? But I mean, learning doesn't start at 5 years old any more than it ends at 18 years old.
Yeah.
So the sooner that we can embrace the way they naturally learn, the less deschooling they're going to have to do to get back to a place where they can naturally learn.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because as soon as you start bringing in those expectations of things they should know, that stuff they have to work through, to realize, is because that places value on something somebody else tells them they should know, and which then devalues what they're interested in, right? That it makes your interests, no matter your age, like we just call them hobbies and we downplay them all the time. Right? That's what I can do after I get my work done. Right? So that has to get worked through so that you can value what it is that you're learning and doing every day. So I think that's a great point. But also how, if you start looking at it right there where, they're learning to walk and talk and they're learning so much just about their environment and all their experiences and everything. I mean, we're always learning, but wow, those first few years is crazy with learning. So, if you can work through that need that there's a timetable, early childhood education, this is stuff they need to learn early. It's only early because you think because they need it for school. Right? It's only because it's preparation for this particular learning environment. And if they're not going to be following that schedule, there is value for a child who has to go to school because, a lot of it is through reading. That's why they want to teach those letters and teach reading early, because reading is very important in school, because that's how they're going to get their information there. That's how they're going to be writing their tests and everything. So if they're not reading, that impacts all their learning, right? In every subject, because it's all communicated through that. But once you can get through that process and realize that, okay, that's the school timetable.
Right.
And it's not a human timetable, and that human timetables are valuable to the individual, right?
And it's interesting once you let go of that end product, then you can see all of the things that happen along the way that are interesting and valuable in their own right. I mean, of course, my son is not reading yet and, isn't close to reading, but because we're not focused on, well, he needs to hurry up and get to this end result of reading.
Yeah.
We can see all of these things that every child has to master before they can get to reading, but that I think a lot of people don't notice because they're so focused on that end goal.
End goal, yeah.
And so, like, for instance, he's starting to recognize letters. Not all of them and not all of the time, but sometimes, and he'll make connections. Like he invented this game where he takes his letter magnets off the fridge, and he'll ask me for something that starts with that. And I forget which letter he started with, but he said, "Mom, what starts with this?" And I told him something, and he ran off and came back with that toy. And started playing this matching game where he'd pick a letter and I'd tell him something that started with that letter that he has a toy of, and he'd go get the toy and collect them all.
So
and
fun.
And that is entertaining in its own right without it being about learning letters or about making progress on some track to reading,
Yeah.
And it's making connections in his mind that that these things relate to each other.
Yeah.
And then, like, just recently, he's made the connection that where there's letters, there is a thing that can be read. So he's just started asking me to read signs to him, or pointing out, like, if I read a story, but then I close the book and he sees that there's text on the back cover that I haven't read, he'll say, "What's that part say?" So he, which it's interesting to see these little connections, that all have to get there before it's possible to be the one sitting down and reading something, and they're all interesting, and they're all, fascinating to discuss with him about what he's discovering about the world and what he's finding out, without any pressure to get past that, and hurry up and make another connection.
It's amazing. Like, and it all goes down to what you said before, focusing on the end goal. If your eye is on reading instead of in the moment, engaged with them, just like it doesn't matter about everything else. You see so much when you're engaged with them because they're so capable. They're just so curious, right?
Right.
They're just trying stuff and figuring out, and I want to engage with you. Like what starts with this? I remember my kids used to like line up letters and ask me what it said, right? And you're pronouncing this long word with no vowels, right? And they thought that was just the most hilarious thing. Because, this wasn't, and they knew that wasn't a word. So just in there, they're picking up that the letters that are in words are important, and the order of the letters in words are important before they knew what the sounds actually were, right? It was just some fun, but out of every little thing we do, a little experiment game we play, because those are all little experiments for them, right? I want to try this and see what happens. What does this mean? What does this mean? It's just so fun to see their minds in action, isn't it?
Yeah. And like with signs and things like that, right now, his interest is not about trying to figure out what the sign says necessarily. His interest right now is mostly about understanding the social dynamics of like, why is there a sign there? So like there's a place we go to on the beach where there's big signs along the dunes saying not to climb on the dunes, and then there's signs as we're leaving the beach saying to make sure that you've picked up all your trash and stuff. And so, he asks me to read those signs every time we go there. But then his questions are not about like, oh, sound that word out for me or something like that. His questions are about, well, why can't I climb on the dunes?
Yeah.
Why is that sign there? And so then we're talking about, about wanting to protect a place that's special to us, and about, that people might not know that it's not okay to climb on the dunes. So there's a sign there to help them, learn what to do in that spot. And so, he's making all these other connections that might be totally missed if I went right from, ooh, you're interested in words, let's teach you to read, but that's not really, but these other things are really valuable for him to understand too, about how we communicate and why we communicate,
That was where I was going to go. Yeah, because writing and reading is really all about communicating, right? About communicating a message. So he's seeing that this is a method, a way to communicate something to people, and you put it on a sign so you can communicate to everybody who walks by. That's so cool. Okay, just before we wrap up here, I've been having a lot of fun. Thank you very much, Jen. So fun. But I wanted to just check in with you and see if there were any more ways you wanted to mention that you find the unschooling mindset, just a valuable way to approach your days, even though your child isn't school age yet.
I think one of the biggest things is about curiosity, both about seeing his curiosity and, facilitating that and giving that space, but also about my being curious myself, about coming into any situation that comes up, or especially if I don't feel like I know what to do or have the answer, coming in it with a perspective of curiosity about, what's really going on and why. And I find that helps both to get to a place of figuring out what to do, and figuring out a creative solution to what to do. But also that it helps to remind me, by coming in with that observation perspective, that helps to remind me that he is his own person and having his own experience in whatever the situation is. And so that helps to remind me then to not go in with the agenda of making my own perspective happen.
That we have the answer, right?
Right. Yeah, that's huge for sure.
That's awesome. And that is something that has just helped me tremendously over the years. It really helps just to, I don't want to say, ego, like knowing there's just a beauty in stepping into a moment, not knowing where it should go. Because as parents, at first, we're told we should know the answer, right? We should be telling our children where to go and to make this, model child, model adult, that we should always have the answer and we should always be telling them what to do. But that shift to just going into a moment, observing and being curious as to how everybody else is seeing that moment and what everybody else is wanting to get out of that moment. It's just not something it can seem really scary until you've done it a few times, I think, right?
Yeah.
Because, then we imagine, people are just going to take advantage of us. Kids are just going to want to do the craziest, most impossible things. But they don't, do they? Of course, they've got really creative and amazing ideas, but that's the whole point of going into a discussion. It's not like we're not telling them what to do, so they're telling us what to do. No, it's just a whole mishmash of discussion and ideas popping up all over the place. And, maybe our next step is completely unrelated to what our conversation was. Oh, and then we were hungry, so we went to make it. But coming at it with that open mind and what if and curiosity and just creativity to the moment. It's just a whole different lifestyle, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's been very useful is to get away from comparing. From this, I think that, as new parents, when we're like scared that we don't know what we're doing, that natural thing is like, oh, my baby's spitting up all the time. Is your baby spitting up all the time? Oh, okay, that must be normal. Oh, my baby wakes up every 2 hours. Does your baby wake up every 2 hours? Oh, okay, that must be normal. you
Yeah.
know, and it can be reassuring and helpful to a point, you know, but I think especially as children start to display more personalities and they're not doing quite so many of the same things as each other anymore,
Mhm.
that it's really helpful. It's almost like unschooling has given me permission to stop worrying about whether my kid's doing the same thing as other people's kids, you know, um, and to stop thinking of it in terms of, well, my kid's better at numbers than that kid, you know, or,
Yeah.
oh no, that kid's better at climbing on the playground than my kid, or whatever, you know, but to let go of that comparison, and also to let go of the anxiety and the fear that goes along with that, and to just see my kid in front of me. And it even makes more room really to connect with other people's children too, because they're not, you know, they're not the competitors of my son.
Yeah.
They're just other amazing children that I can see being amazing in their own right, you know?
Oh, yeah. That's such a great point. I'd never really thought of it that way, but absolutely. It's just so much more welcoming of each child as an individual, as themselves, right? Because
Right.
because because it doesn't matter one to the next. There is no comparison anymore. Everybody can just be doing, and we can enjoy what it is that they enjoy. Like I always love when my kids friends came over and say, you know, what do you love doing, and just letting them, like any kid, what's your most favorite thing, and they can talk
Right.
for ages, right? And
Yes.
excited, whether it's cars or dinosaurs or whatever it is. It's just
Right.
so fun to see them in their element, right?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
And there's a lot of room, I think, you know, when because I don't know a lot of unschoolers locally. So most of my friends and most of my son's friends are, you know, are more conventional parents,
Yeah.
at least when it comes to education. You know, and so there'll be times when, you know, somebody comes in with, you know, oh, well, you know, I'm so sorry that my kid is doing this thing and it's so, you know, whatever, coming in
Into it.
apologizing because they're afraid that I'm going to be judging them, you
Yeah.
know, and there's so much more room now to be able to say to those people, oh, wow, he must be having a really hard time with that. You know, maybe we can do this and try that and see if that, you know, makes the play date go better today or whatever, you know, and
Yeah.
they go, oh, and so you just see the parent relax. You
Yeah.
know, and so then everybody can connect better like that, you know, everybody can connect so much better when we can all just see each other as individuals where we are without all this other stuff
I know. It's
attached.
so true. Like even now when I'm just out and about, sometimes you'll see a parent with a child who's doing, something, whether, they're stopped still looking at little flowers, or, at some statue, something, or they're, walking very slowly on like a curb or something, and I always just take a moment to try and catch the parent's attention and just smile, and say, that's cool. And you can just kind of see them relax into that, right? Because you can see the pressure mounting, are people starting to get annoyed? Are people starting to look at us? You can see that pressure of judgment just building into their posture even, right? So it's really nice to be able to acknowledge that and help just put them at ease, and it just opens up the situation in that moment, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yay. Well, thank you so much, Jen. That was so much fun. I really appreciate
Thank you
you
for
chatting
having me. It
with
was lots of fun.
me. And before we go, where's the best place for people to connect with you online?
So I have a Facebook page that has nothing to do with unschooling. Called Adventures Endpoint, where I take photos doing ballet in all sorts of strange places when we travel and stuff.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
post them just for fun. So people can check that out there. And then you can also find me on Facebook as Jen Kobrick. And you can send me a private message or something like that. I probably won't accept a friend request if I haven't talked to you and I don't know who you are. But you can definitely send me a message there and connect that way.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.